Okay, so I've been kind of like sitting around for a bit trying to explain what's going on, and I've had to basically kind of restart this like at least once. So let me just kind of describe what I've been thinking. So it's kind of hard for me to really figure out where people are sitting when it comes to politics because people don't really know where I'm coming with this sort of thing. So how about I kind of describe it? Because while it is really easy to kind of just like look at a political compass and basically go like, yep, I'm like this far over on this direction, I'm this far down on this direction. You know, it's it's simple, but they don't really understand how simple it is to kind of describe this system. And oftentimes it's hard to parse out for some people. So let's just kind of fill this out. So everyone kind of knows what a political compass kind of looks like. Very simple, like the red goes in this corner, like stuff like that. But no one really knows what they were talking about when it comes to the different quadrants, you know. So let's kind of just like put a lot of this to like a good middle ground. So you know where I'm coming from, and I could kind of explain to you what my reasoning is. Now, very simple. So, up on what I shall refer to as the northern part is authoritarianism, and down in the southern part um is libertarianism. Basically like big government, um, big government, small government. It's not, but to be a little bit more precise, think of like two pyramids. Authoritarianism is making a very sharp, tall pyramid where the person sitting at the top has a wider vantage point for of basically being able to see all of the kind of stuff and basically being able to make judgment calls. And the more libertarian you get, you will have a more flat type of government where a lot more hands can basically get onto the upper levels uh, of the political stratum. So you basically have very small order um, democracies, and you have more larger representational republics. And a lot of those things, you know, everyone tries to like figure out like where the perfect balance is, and it's why a lot of governments in the entire world, by the way, sit on this populist line that's right in the middle. It's like when you take like a majority of like America, most of America is right there. You know, most of Europe is like right there. And then you have basically like some outliers that are like a little bit further towards there, but very rarely will you have a governmental system, a big governmental system, like all the way like down here, like way in the corner, you know? You're gonna find like the majority of a country is sitting on this line. So most of society is gonna basically sit in like an oval shape, like around the populous line. It's which is where like political streams kind of get involved, but that's beside the point. And then you have basically the left and the right on the economic scale. Left economics is about like social programs and making sure that wealth is dispersed equally upon like the entire like scale of a system, and the right is a more meritocratic system in which people are given what they work for. So the harder you work, the more you get. And this system basically leads to people kind of hoarding wealth and not really wanting to let go of it. But this end of it also has people that are more, I don't want to use the word slackers, but people that are less likely to put in hard effort if they are always given things. There's always like this like balance between like which one is it? So you get this like median line in the middle, like I said, that is trying to find like the balance between not going too far into communism or too far into like a fiscal conservative sort of like sense. So you're always trying to find like the center line. And what most of the world has kind of like agreed is that there's two sides of this argument that are way in the center. You have basically the the progressive parties and you have the liberal parties, you know, and they're just like on opposite sides of the lines in those corners. And at the end of the day, it's a lot of it's a lot of like back and forth of like which one is better, but like I personally feel like that the only real contention between the two is that a progressive system is more likely to side with a communist and a liberal system is more likely to side with an imperialist. And that's about it. A progressive will very rarely like reach across the aisle that far, and a liberal will very rarely reach across the aisle that far. It's all that kind of stuff. But is like what is effectively like the two other corners in the center. And for this one, I actually had to figure out like what it is. There is a, like expanded sort of like wide overhead view of the political compass that, you know, talks about like certain things. Famously it has like up here you have like technocracies which are like is like let the AI like run the government to figure out what things are. And then you have things down over here like transhumanists are that are like upload yourself to the cloud, become robots and all that kind of stuff. And it all kind of comes together with both of these two corners basically ending up resembling a kleptocracy, which is basically like Mongol horde type of things where it's like figure out like where you want to like take things from and all that kind of stuff. But it never really like sat well with me to kind of describe it in that way. But this sort of like uh these sort of like systems kind of like end up looking like that. So I'm gonna just refer to this right over here as a it's weird because if I just call it like a leftist sort of like position, most people kind of know what I mean, but I'm trying to be a little bit less vague. So if I refer to, like right here as a as like the general leftist position, most people are gonna know what I mean, you know? And if I just call that like the general libertarian, like the Libertarian Party, most people kind of understand what I mean by that. But like most systems are basically yo-yoing between these two poles. Because the further over you get over here, the weirder it gets, and the further over here, the weirder it gets. Most um most left-leaning things start weighing down into like small order government, and things that are more like right-leaning go into uh like uh larger governments. And the reason why is because to maintain a right leaning perspective on things, a very meritocratic system, where things can like get hoarded a lot, you need more governmental systems to kind of support that whole sort of thing. If you want more like left-leaning, like share things out, you eventually get it like more libertarian because you could basically create like smaller systems to get all that to work. A lot of people think that it's the other way around, but that's just how I've always kind of like seen governments kind of working. But there is actually something kind of funny when you start looking into more wider reaching sort of things. This right here is normal politics. You know, like this is where like all of the normal politics are. And I find that really funny because everything else that I'm now about to talk about is what is referred to as far politics. You know, the far left, the far right, with all that kind of stuff. And when we kind of like disassemble all of this kind of stuff, you start getting into the territories where people refer to them as extremists because they're not sitting on this generally accepted center line in neutral zones. You know, everything else out of this is out of bounds. Everything out of this is like extremist politics, and that's the fascinating thing. Is because no one wants to actually say what those far politics are until it starts getting in the way with actually talking about things. So, I think what we need to do is first talk about like what all this is, you know? So, let's start from the least interesting answer I will give in this whole thing. I'm going to just refer to this far corner as nothingism because in a sort of way it kind of is. Um Now you could basically go like, well, there's like a lot of things over there. And you would be kind of right, but there is actually a better term for it. Anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism is sometimes kind of like jokingly characterized as sort of like I am a soldier for the for the country of McDonald's. And I love describing it like that because making it as silly as possible is the best way to describe what is actually going on when we get all the way down here into this corner. It is impossible to have a system that is both right leaning where you have these where you have these like traditionalism and all of these sort of like cultural systems that are trying to go, but also have no actual overarching like leadership for any of these systems. All of these systems kind of fall apart or is completely made fun of because of how impossible it is to actually maintain any of this stuff. So this area, this quadrant over here, is where everything just falls apart. Nothing makes sense. It is all stupid. And most of everything else is very packed, all the way over here. This is where things fall apart. And it's where like we start getting into like horseshoe theory type stuff. Because in reality, the horseshoe is this. It's this right here. Because there's nothing over here to make the circle whole. Uh, I also have like another like idea of like how the horseshoe theory works, but in reality, like horseshoe theory as a whole is just an idea that authoritarian systems look a lot closer to each other than um, than things that are on the populist line, which most things on the populist line all kind of converge into this gray zone over here. But it doesn't matter how far left or how far right you are, you start looking the same, you know? And like all of that kind of just fits, you know? So, how about we take this from this position right here and just move clockwise? Because I think that that's sort of like the best way to kind of talk about all of this stuff. And you, like a lot of people are not gonna where this sort of like goes, but it does make a little bit of sense that this is like immediately the next thing that happens. And it is generally associated with, this corner of politics right over here. Again, anything that is like this far down into libertarianism falls apart. Like, I might as well just put this right here and then just delete this entire bottom row. It just does not exist. Like, it is. I might actually just. I might actually just do that just to like make a point that like all of this down here is just static. Like the political compass is just so much smaller than you would think it is just by looking at it. Again, like anything that is like down over here just does not make any sense. Like you could go like, "Oh, down over here is like like as I was saying before, you have like kleptocracies and all that kind of stuff. But over here you also have like eco-fascism, where is like all where is the idea that you need to destroy society and just build it up from scratch where everyone's just living in trees and you're never going to get stuff like that. But it's like what is over here? You get socialism. So on the on the far side of the green part, you have socialism. So you have trade unions. You have all of these sort of like systems built in place where you could have of smaller groups of social programs that are all kind of working together to support the little guy. And again, socialism is this sort of like catch all that you will eventually find when it comes to like most of like libertarian left programs. Like if you are even like a little bit further left, socialism is immediately going to pop up. And it's so hard to kind of explain to people like why this is kind of a bad thing. Because socialism is literally trade union stuff. And it's kind of hard to kind of explain anything other than that. So back in the day, you had what are known as company towns. You had you had systems where a company is, let's just say, making a silver mine out in the middle of nowhere. And so they built the mine, and then away from the mine, they have a headquarters to basically manage the stuff. At that headquarters, you need a place to basically box up the stuff and send it out so it can go there. So you need people that are relatively close by so that you can basically have a system where people are close enough to the mine and close enough to the distribution center to do all this stuff. So you have a company town. You have a company town that works right next to it. Did it work 100% of the time? Not really. But a lot of socialist programs eventually turn most businesses into company towns. This is why, like, its next door neighbor, which is, um, I spelt that completely wrong. You know what? I don't think most people would even care if I spelt it wrong. To be honest, you understand what I mean. But like communism is just on the other side of that authoritarian line. where it's like socialism is more about like spreading it all out and like making it like that. Communism is more about having like uh more of like this more of like this rigid structure to it where you do need to have some level of an authority figure onto it. Where socialism is more about like no, everyone that is in the town, in this company town, gets a vote to all decide on what's going on. And a lot of like capitalist programs like taking advantage of socialist and communist systems to basically go, yep, that's exactly what is happening. But there is an overarching like person who is then taking all of that system and basically being the monarch of that whole system. It's oddly deceptive. It's like you could have a socialist system inside of a capitalist system. You could have a communist system inside of a capitalist system. But these kind of like are designed around being outside the purview of a more of like a capitalist hegemony. And it's why they're kind of seen as kind of a uh like when you try to get them to convince someone to become a socialist or a communist, it's a little hard. Uh, if I were to have like a bigger like diagram, I would say that like socialism would be about right here, communism would be like a little bit further out, like past a little like a little bit more left. And honestly, like a lot of communists would even like say that they're like way down here in this way down here in this corner as well. But like at the end of the day, they're just next door neighbors. It's just that socialism is more about like a democratic sort of like overlay onto it, and communism is more about like looking towards like elders for guidance. And that's sort of why they're differentiated. And of course, like north of that, you get Marxism, which is taking all of those sort of ideas and then going, yes, you get to have your socialist programs and your like small order like communes sitting in a group, but everything in the main city is dictated by the dictator. All that kind of stuff. It's There's a whole sort of like layout where you basically get an overarching person who is talking, where you have someone who is at the end of the day on top of all of this. Okay, now that I've fixed that. Okay, so again, it's literally pyramid structure. Socialism, flat pyramid. Communism, you have a bit of a pyramid. Marxism, so thin. It's a pyramid so thin that you will never find someone trying to climb up social programs. It's this whole idea that like the people that are on top when the system happens can't climb up it anymore. Everything is set in the place. Nothing will ever change unless there is some sort of leadership mix-up. A lot of the reasons why these systems kind of fail is what I will kind of like describe as the three generation problem. So, generation 1, has a yeah, generation 1 has a group of people who are coming together to make the system work. Generation 2 is then basically raised to believe in these ideas by the first generation. They're watching the system be built up, maintained, brought up to it, and generation 2 gets to see how fervent generation 1's system is. But when generation 3 comes along, generation 3 is watching these people like phase out of their systems, become like uh older men and women who are basically seen as more of like thought leaders and elders that are no longer like able to maintain the system. These people are then basically like being replaced into those systems. And these people are watching the first group of people and the first group of people no longer able to really like do it anymore. The second group of people no longer not really seeing the full vision because they didn't make the system in the first place. They're just kind of taking it over and like and trying to replicate what they've seen. Very monkey see, monkey do type of thing. Generation 3 is now looking at it from like two steps removed, and a lot of the times they're like, I don't really get it. So when Generation 1 dies out and Generation 4 is now born, Generation 4 no longer even gets to see what Generation 1 wanted and is so far removed that Generation 4 is no longer in the system. Like they have now like removed themselves from that system and there is nothing else keeping in the place. So when Generation 2 eventually like dies out, there is now no longer a structure in place. This is why it took 3 generations for any any Marxist based system to fall apart. You have the USSR fell apart in 3 generations. You have the United Order in America fall apart in 3 generations. All of these kind of things are all based around the idea that you cannot keep a system in place if the people who made the system are no longer there to control it. And it's and it's one of these things that I keep trying to tell people that it just does not work. And sometimes it gets through to them, but not really. Now, we're about to start talking about like one of the most controversial things in this whole like list and this whole setup and why a lot of people are going to disagree with me. I probably spelled that wrong. No, I actually didn't. Oh, I definitely did now. There we go. So, right up here in this corner, which I will put slightly left of the actual like left or right dichotomy is fascism. So Mussolini, when he was coming up a with fascism as a like subject, he was looking back at like old Roman republics and like how they kind of like had all that set up. And he was taking his own ideas as a socialist himself. How do you make a left-leaning system that works like a right-leaning authoritarian system? The answer that he got is basically right on the center line, fascism. And fascism as a whole is really good at controlling a system, making it run. But the problem is that it will only work well for the exact people that it was designed for. Like every fascist system will fall apart because they need to start excluding people that do not roll with the system. Again, you still have the 3 generational system in place. Every single like fascist system will eventually will eventually like fall apart into a liberal system. Just like how every like monarchy will eventually become a progressive system. Enough people on this side of politics will cross over onto the other side into the libertarian side of the spectrum. Every single time you have a left-leaning authority fall apart, it will become a right-leaning democracy. whenever a right-leaning authoritarian system falls apart, it will become a left-leaning democracy. Like all that kind of stuff. It's why when you eventually get to like American politics that are like sitting right here, they're kind of just like um, you know, you have conservatism like right here into this corner. Whenever you have like a conservative movement and all that kind of stuff, and it gets 3 generations removed from that, you start getting a lot more social programs and a lot more progressive children being born out of conservative groups. And this isn't really to say like that either one of those two systems are bad. It's just that you have these like crisscrossing sort of systems that are in place. So going back to the, you know, 4 generational cycles, you basically have generation one, generation two, generation three, generation four. And they basically make this crisscross sort of like N shape, basically going across the like political divides. It's it happens every single time in every single like political group, and right now in Generation Alpha, you have a bunch of conservative leaning people that are slowly gearing themselves towards more like authoritarian systems because their parents were progressive. And the reason why these people were progressive is because their parents were mostly liberal. It's like this like yo-yoing back and forth between like all these sort of things to make like figure eight sort of patterns all over the place. And I think the funniest thing is when you start looking into like more authoritarian like right-leaning systems, you know, it's like everyone assumes that we're eventually going to get into like like the generally accepted like World War II sort of like era sort of like politics. You have like the progressive democracies fighting against the more authoritarian systems. The reason why America didn't like dealing with Russia afterwards is because they were a liberal system fighting against a Marxist system. Like it's all of this. The progressive British hating hating uh the fascist like German and Italian systems. But way over here across the line is actually is theocracy. Um so this word may not mean anything to anyone. Like unless you really are like really in deep into politics. But like theocracy is the idea that like you will take a cultural religious dogma and basically say this is the ruler of our country. And you might have noticed something about like this line that we have started to draw from Marxism outwards. You know, you have a dictator that basically says, I will basically guide people through I will basically guide people to create a socialist program. You have a fascist who will say, I will dictate people to create that will make a hardworking progressive system. A theocracy is the exact same way. They want to create very a group of libertarian minded people, but are structured in a religious system to keep going. The way that they do this is that they have a cultural system in place to make sure that the gears keep rolling. And again, that's the whole goal of authoritarianism, is to keep gears turning. And it doesn't really matter like what their justification is, whether it is, whether it is economic gain, whether it is a sort of like idea of like racial or class divide, whether it is keeping some sort of cultural like hegemony. It is always about keeping those gears turning. And it's why when we get to the furthest right that we get when it comes to all of this sort of system, we get what is called a monarchy, which a lot of people like when they hear like, oh yeah, monarchies, like kings and princes and all that kind of thing. But what a monarchy really is a cultural system that is only kept in place because no one wants to change it. It's this sort of, as I said, it is a system where someone works really hard to gain enough wealth to become a king. That king then passes on his legacy to his son and his son's son, and they keep going down the line that way. Why is why is Louis the 14th king? Well, it's because there were 13 other Louis that were before him to be that king. Like all that kind of stuff. It's why when you it's why it's so hard to talk about like some people when it comes to like this is why it's always really funny whenever I hear like, oh, they're a fascist, they're like part of the far right, and I like kind of like give a side eye. It's like no, like it was like American liberals and even like conservative parties are further right than fascists. The problem is that fascists take over a system and they try desperately hard to keep it. The things you actually want to like worry about when it comes to a far right system is people that want wealth and never give it up. It's like over here in these monarchies is where you get like these rich oligarchs, which are just holding on to money and then basically like dripping it like a little bit off into other people's like pockets, basically going, do my bidding for me. It's like this is where all of the problems in a lot of society goes. This is where a lot of problems in society goes. Again, it is this neither of them are are worse than each other. It is both bad because it's both authoritarian, you know? And it's why I kind of like preference this with basically saying most people like systems that are progressive or liberal. Anything that is outside that bounds feels super just extreme in every sort of regard. So a progressive is going to sit there, and then a conservative walks it, basically going, what is wrong with just having a meritocratic system where someone works 5 times harder than another person and gets paid 5 times more? And a progressive goes, because the social programs for that other person that might have a problem with working 5 times harder is needed. And a socialist will go, I love that. I want a system like that. In fact, I want everyone to be inside of a system where we're all sharing money between each other. And a progressive could kind of get behind that, but a liberal will never like that. And then a liberal will basically go, but what about like social cohesion and making sure that everyone gets equal amounts of everything, so everything under the law, under society, everything is equalized and it's great. And a theocratic person will come up going, yes, my culture is the one that should be the one that everyone is governed under. It's like every single time that a normal person that is sitting in this like center line in the center wants to bring up literally anything, there is like two or three extremists sitting behind them going, I could use that system. It's why I absolutely despise Marxism. I'm a communist. I like talking about like all this kind of stuff because it's, like important for me to explain. I'm a communist. I want like a small like I am like to kind of explain where I am. I am like right there. Like when it comes to politics. I describe myself as a communist. I want like a small I want a small commune of people working together outside the bounds of like a large government trying to take control over it and taking care of their elders, raising them up so that the elders can basically be like the thought leaders and the people that are kind of like dictating all this kind of stuff. I don't want an actual dictator to kind of take over those systems. But every single time I've ever read something about like Marx, and even though I like Engels a little bit more, I've never really agreed with the Communist Manifesto when it comes to these kind of things. It's why when I read the works of like Lenin and Trotsky, they're a little bit closer to what I would want in these sort of systems. The problem is that like they will eventually be just like subsumed by Marxist mentalities. And then the Marxists will basically go like, yes, we need like tanks rolling through like cities to basically make sure that that to make sure our small order government works. And I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? Meanwhile, you have people that will say that they're conservatives and basically be like, man, we just want merit for our own to basically uh, work in the way that we want it to be. And then you listen to them a little bit longer, and then they say yes, and that is why we need a holy war to basically go into another country and like take it over. It's like in this sort of corner you get these colonialists that basically want to kind of like take over a space. To be basically like, yes, we will now dictate them so that they understand the joys of a democracy. And it's so weird. It's like this is why it's been so hard for me to kind of explain to people like how systems work. And I've mentioned to some people that it's like even like describing like this gray zone over here as basically nothingness. Like I have never seen a person basically say themselves, yes, I am a anarcho collectivist, like something that's way down here. And it's like, what does that mean? It goes, well, I'm an anarchist that believes in like social programs. And I'm like, how does that work? It's like, how are you both against any form of government while also being for gathering all that stuff together? It's like, and then over here you basically have, you have these sort of like Christian libertarianism, where it's basically like, yes, it's like I want all of these like religious sort of like things, both in like government and all that kind of stuff, but I want it like so out of the way that like you're only that money is only really like talked about in terms of like singular church buildings. And it's like what exactly do you want? It's like these people do not exist. Like people down here, they do not exist. They will eventually make their way up further north. I have been trying to explain this to people for so long and thought through this in many sort of ways that this is like one of the few times I've actually like sat down to kind of like map all this out. Why is because this is frustrating. This is a really frustrating thing to kind of like mention to people and to have people kind of understand what we're like how things sort of connect together. And I know for a fact that people will look at this list and basically still shake their head and go, nah, I'm further away from that person. And it's like, I was watching something in which someone who describes himself as a conservative basically pointed at someone who is, a little bit more libertarian than a fascist, somewhere in like the leftist sort of dichotomy, and they're like, it's like, it's like they're to the right of me. It's like how? How are you saying that someone is more that you are less to the right of someone who is a leftist? Like it's hard, you know? Like I feel like most people nowadays they've basically just sat upon this line basically saying I'm a progressive or a liberal. A conservative is a little bit further left than me, and the only thing that's further uh, and the only thing that's further left than a progressive is a socialist, and the only thing that's further right than a liberal is a conservative. And they're only thinking about this thin line that basically stretches between these sort of things. It's so hard sometimes. I wish I could explain it any better than this, but that's all I really have to say on the matter. It's been like 40 minutes. I've had to like stop myself in places. I'm probably not even going to edit this. I'm probably going to just upload this as is to kind of explain how this all works. And if you paid attention for any of this, like share it with others. I want other people to kind of explain like where they kind of see themselves in all this because I know for a fact that there are going to be people who, even after hearing me explain all of this, they're gonna shake their head and goes, but there's no way that they are actually where they say they are. And my only response to that is that this has basically been like a decade of just looking at the internet. Like I'm not even like college trained. I never went out of like high school level. I don't even know if I even really like picked up a high school diploma. You know? I don't even know where it is, to be honest. I probably have to like consult my school to like figure out where that is. But I barely got out of like high school with any sort of efficiency. This is just me looking at politics from this like overhead view of everything of what everyone talks about. Watching people that are on the left, people who are on the right, people who have more libertarian mindsets, even watching people who are die-hard Marxists and fascists and them explaining what their thought process is, and me basically dropping them into certain categories and basically going, okay, we could talk about this. Like literally today, I was watching something, and I might even record myself like reacting to and like breaking down the sort of ideas that are inside this video. And listening to someone describe a liberal as a fascist. And the reason why is because that person is a progressive. And it's like, well, everything north of me is a fascist. And I'm like, of course, what is left than you is a fascist. You're on the same, you're on the same left right dichotomy scale as them, you know? It's like, and I'm sitting here as a communist listening to a liberal talk, and I'm like, yeah, I can understand them because we're on the populist line. It's like they're further south than either of us. And so that means that both of us are far north than he is. It's like it's frustrating. It's so frustrating. And I think at the end of the day, most people could kind of come to terms with the fact that that these sort of like categories are just in place to describe the indescribable, which is everyone wants a society that is perfectly fit for them, and everyone is geared towards certain mindsets and certain like viewpoints that are all built upon like preconceived notions of how society has affected them and how they want society to work for them. And no one is in agreement with anything. And the reason why is because everyone collectively is not on the same wavelength. And guess what? That's how the world works. The world works because no one is in agreement with anything. And at the end of the day, isn't that sort of the beauty of it? The beauty is that you could have a libertarian talk to a leftist and they could both kind of agree that they are not extreme, and they could both kind of like laugh at like a Marxist and a like anarcho-capitalist and like kind of like and like be like, yeah, those weird people that are like way more extreme than me. And the less that we kind of value these extreme sort of like points of view that are off the populist line, the better. Like again, the people that believe in basically nonsense that I don't even have the the brain space or the energy to really go over what they really believe way down here. Or like the people that are way up here figuring out what part of their life drove them to want to be this authoritarian in like in any sort of regard. But this is it. This is everything in my entire life for the last 10 years summed up as one image. And you could probably hear my voice that I have driven myself crazy trying to explain this to people. This is it. This is it, everyone. This is like the thing that has driven me mad for years. And it is nowhere as annoying to describe to someone than anything else in the world. Like, you are gonna have like factions that are like both conservative, like fighting against each other about like what it sort of is, because one of those conservatives are secretly a theocrat. One of them is secretly a like colonial monarchist. Like, and they're trying to pretend that they're on the median line. And it's just not going to work out eternally. The more people are accurate about their labels and the more they correctly describe themselves, the better it is for everyone. Just get over with it. Just actually say who you are and just roll with it. I think I kind of also need to say that, like, when I say leftist, that's more of like the modern way of saying it. But what I'm mostly trying to say is people that are, like, uh, leftists are like the proper like trade union type of people. And I think at the end of the day, most people would describe themselves as either being pro trade union or against trade unions. And it's why America kind of sits like right here in like the liberal camp for like a lot of it. You're going to have the more right-leaning conservatives kind of like talk about how you need more God in your life and you need more like leftists who are going to be like you need more like trade union protections for capitalism, but you're never going to have someone in America really be like highly respected if they basically say, yes, everyone should read the Bible every single day, and that should be your life. And whenever someone like that comes out, people on like on the left of politics are gonna like say like no because I'm not really like religious, and people on the right are gonna be like Come on, we have better things to talk about when it comes to the economy. And that's what I feel like eventually like Gen Alpha is going to realize as they start getting into like political debates when they like start like becoming adults and like getting into it is that Alpha is going to be these like group of people who are going to be really tapped into this sort of like mindset to figure all this stuff out and talk about it in better ways. Because like I'm like 30 now and my brain is just falling apart just trying to like keep up with like a lot of the stuff they're just talking about. It's just, just my brain is just overheating at this point and I'm just like rambling. If you understood any of this or you liked any of it, like leave a like, comment, like whatever. I just like discussions. I like people talking about the sort of things that can kind of get like everything rolling. So, if you wanted to like let me know how wrong I was, how like where you kind of stand on all this, let me know. Anyway, I'll see all of y'all next time. Who knows? Maybe I don't even know which channel I'm uploading this. Goodbye, everybody.